The town of Dry Creek lay restless that evening, its single dirt road carrying more silence than traffic. The sun sagged low, spilling amber light across warped storefronts and the sagging steeple of the church. It was there, at the edge of the mercantile porch, that Elias Crowder first heard the words that caught in his ribs and would not leave him. "My brother harshed eaten in 3 days. Sir, can you buy my doll?" The voice belonged not to a child, as he first thought, but to a young woman with dust on her hem and weariness settled in the hollow beneath her eyes. She clutched a rag doll at her chest, worn thin from years of handling. Beside her stood a boy, thin as a fence rail, his lips cracked from thirst. Elias froze, hat in hand. He could feel the eyes of the townsfolk pricking at his back. Mrs. Whitlow, the mercantile keeper's wife, whispered into another woman's ear. Men spat tobacco into the dirt and shook their heads. The girl, no, the woman, stood straight despite her plea. 3 days, she repeated, the doll trembling in her hands. Elias wanted to vanish. He knew the bite of hunger, the humiliation of asking. His ranch, once green with promise, now lay parched and gray, cattle reduced to bone and hide. He had borrowed, bartered, begged favors from men who never forgot to collect their shame in return. He cleared his throat. "Keep your doll, miss. I'll fetch you bread." Her eyes flickered, almost wounded at being denied the exchange, as though charity cut deeper than hunger. But she said nothing. Elias pressed coins across the counter and gathered a loaf, setting it gently in the boy's arms. The child looked at him with a kind of solemn gratitude that made Elias look away. When they left, the air around him buzzed with whispers. Crowder's pitying widows now, 2 of a kind, the failed rancher and the beggar. He walked out into the falling dusk with his jaw clenched, the image of her still seared in his mind, proud back straight, doll clutched like the last piece of her soul. The days that followed brought him restless sleep. He thought of her again while mending fence wire, her voice echoing in the stillness. Eventually, shame gave way to something else, a pull, quiet but steady, like a current underwater. He rode out one morning past the town's edge. The Ashford homestead was a husk of what it once had been, a porch leaning heavy on one side, windows patched with cloth, a chicken coop empty. The boy sat out front whittling, his eyes too sharp for 12. Inside, he glimpsed Clarabelle Ashford. He learned her name later, kneeling by the hearth with nothing cooking above it. She rose when she saw him, wiping her hands on her skirt. "I didn't call for company," she said evenly. "No, ma'am," Elias answered. He set a small sack by the steps. "Cornmeal. Do with it what you will." Her mouth tightened. "We ain't beggars." "Nor am I," he said, meeting her eyes before turning back to his horse. He left before she could return the sack. The days turned, slow and dry. And yet, each time Elias passed that road, he found another excuse to leave something. An old hammer, nails, a coil of rope. He mended her porch rail one morning while she was in town, then vanished before she returned. When Clara finally confronted him, her words carried both gratitude and wounded pride. "If you aim to shame me like the others, I'd rather starve than endure it." Elias only shook his head. "Not shame, ma'am. Just work that needs doing." She studied him then, and in that long silence, something softened between them, though no word claimed it. The climax came one blistering afternoon at the mercantile. Clara stood in line, doll in hand again. The merchant frowned at her. "Best keep toys for play, ma'am. They don't buy bread." Her cheeks burned, but she held it out still, defiance flickering in her eyes. The room fell quiet. Elias stepped forward from back, his boots striking hollow against the wood floor. He took the doll gently from her hands, held it up as though it were the finest china. "Reckon I've been searching for one just like this," he said, his voice carrying. "How much?" The merchant blinked. Clara's breath caught. The crowd murmured, some scoffing, others stunned. Elias laid coins down without another word. He placed the bread in Clara's basket, the doll tucked carefully atop it, as though it were a crown jewel. And for the first time, her eyes met his not with shame, but with something closer to recognition. The weeks after that mercantile afternoon unfolded like slow-turning pages in a worn prayer book. Elias found himself at the Ashford place more often, though never by invitation. There was always a rail to straighten, a roof shingle to set, a calf to tend when sickness circled the herd. Silas followed him like a shadow, the boy's hunger for learning almost as sharp as his hunger for food. Elias showed him how to twist wire, how to mend a saddle strap, how to listen for the hollow thud in a fence post that meant rot. Clara moved more cautiously around him. She carried herself with the kind of pride that survives famine but bends under whispers. When her eyes met his, they often lingered too long, then darted away as though such stillness might betray something she wasn't ready to name. The town noticed. Dry Creek had always been more tongue than mercy. Crowder set his sights low. Mrs. Whitlow murmured on the church steps, a beggar widow to match his failing spread. The words floated like thorns, sharp enough to reach Clara's ears. One evening, as Elias stacked cutwood by her porch, Clara stepped outside, shawl wrapped tight. "Maybe you shouldn't come round so much," she said quietly, her voice low but steady. "The talk. And talk's poison, Mr. Crowder. It spreads quicker than hunger." Elias straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Let him talk." Her gaze wavered, caught between relief and fear. "It ain't so simple." "No," he said, "but it's honest." Silence stretched between them, deep and aching, until the boy's laughter broke it. Silas had found a rabbit in one of Elias's traps. Clara's lips almost curved into a smile. Almost. The summer storm came sudden, without warning. Clouds boiled black over the horizon, and before the town could breathe, the sky split open with thunder. Rain poured in sheets, the dry creek bed swollen to a roaring torrent. Elias was out mending a corral fence when he heard Clara's scream cut through the storm. He dropped the post driver and ran. The creek near her homestead had burst its banks. Silas, chasing a stray chicken, had been swept too close to the edge. His small body slid into the current with a cry. Clara stood helpless, skirts heavy with rain, her voice raw as she screamed his name. Elias leapt without thought. The water was icy, angry, thrashing. He caught Silas by the arm, just as the boy's head vanished beneath the froth. The current slammed Elias into a log, pain blooming in his side, but he held fast, hauling the boy toward the bank. When at last they tumbled onto the mud, Clara fell to her knees beside them, clutching Silas to her chest. Elias lay, gasping, blood mixing with rain on his temple. Her hands, trembling, found his face. "You fool," she whispered, her words breaking with gratitude and fear. "You damn, stubborn fool." He closed his eyes, too weary to answer. For 3 days he lay in her small cabin, his ribs bound, fever licking at him. Clara tended him with a care that was both fierce and tender. She sat at his side in the dim light, damp cloth in hand, whispering things she would never have spoken had he been awake. That he was the only man who had looked at her without pity. That Silas smiled now in ways he hadn't since their father died. That she feared her heart was softening in ways it ought not to. When Elias's eyes finally opened, she looked away quickly, as though ashamed he might have heard. But his hand found hers before she could withdraw it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The storm passed, and with it came a strange kind of renewal. The town gathered at the church for a barn raising, the old preacher leading them in prayer. Clara stood with Silas at her side, Elias leaning on a cane, but standing tall. The whispers still circled, but something in their presence hushed them. The reverend spoke of grit, of the Lord's mercy shown not in riches, but in hands willing to lift another. And in that moment, Clara lifted her chin. No shame, no trembling, just a quiet strength that made even Mrs. Whitlow's tongue fall still. Back at her homestead, a small shelf by the hearth held the rag doll. Elias had stitched its torn seams. Clara had washed it clean. It sat there not as a relic of shame, but as a testament, proof that desperation can turn, with a single act of grace, into something like dignity. And if you had passed through Dry Creek in those days, you might have seen them, Elias mending fence with Silas at his side, Clara watching from the porch with a gaze less guarded now. They did not declare anything aloud. Their bond grew instead in glances, in shared silence, in small mercies offered and accepted. Old folks say life hangs by such threads: bread offered when hunger bites, a hand extended in a flood, a doll bought not out of need but out of kindness. And if you carry anything from this tale, let it be this: The world is turned not by grand gestures, but by quiet ones. The kind that ask for nothing, yet give a soul back its worth.